Hello and welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage, in the gloomy overcast state of Maine on this Wednesday, the last week of 2022. It's not raining, snowing, and the wind isn't blowing and the power is on, so I guess I'll be all right. I just had to go out. I started shooting this video. I had my parts washer going, and even here in the extension of the garage with the door shut, it's very hard to hear. So I shut it off just to talk with you for just a few minutes about a very unpopular subject. And it's hard to believe with everything going on around us. If you're a hot rodder, so many people take the ostrich approach and bury their head in the sand about what's going on. It's frustrating. There's very little we can do about it. But in recent events last week, the congressional session in the United States ended for the year of 2022. And for at least the third year trying, the SEMA-sponsored bill, Specialty Equipment Marketing Association, the good guys that are fighting for you and I for our rights to produce, buy, and install hot rod parts. So, the bill, the RPM Act, the Recognizing the Protection of Motorsports, is intended to make sure, because we're going to have to go over some history, but the EPA, their stance is any vehicle ever produced with a VIN, a vehicle identification number, cannot be turned into a race car. And manufacturers that manufacture parts to do that are also doing it illegally. So think about that for a minute. Every type of racing you can think of, with a few exceptions, are typically done on using parts from a manufactured vehicle. That's where most of us operate. Other than, NASCAR, because they had a bout with the EPA in the 70s and immediately went to producing their own engines, chassis, sheet metal. They no longer use production vehicles. And that's why. One of the reasons why. And in like NHRA drag racing, Pro Stock, and Top Fuel Funny Car and Dragster, they don't use production blocks. So they have no ties to anything ever produced. The vehicles never came down a production line. They never had a VIN. So that is the way around it. You're not emissions, you don't have to follow any compliance on a vehicle like that. But the rest of us that want to convert a vehicle that was once driven on the roads of America into a dedicated race car, we can't. So let's go over a little bit of history on this super popular subject. Pollution comes in many forms, or is produced in many forms, but let's just talk transportation. Originally we had steamboats replaced, or running at the same time with trains that were eventually replaced by the automobile. So in the early 1900s, we started producing automobiles. They replaced the horse. And after a couple world wars, we came out of World War II an industrial giant. And we did things in this country we'd never be able to do again. We built the interstate system. Nowadays, it would take 100 years to get the permits to do what we did in 15 years, or 20 years. We're still building interstates, but you know what I'm talking about. If they had to reroute a stream or cut through a swamp, they just did it. They didn't ask permission. And we built lots of things. We had factories. We were really, getting it done. And cars were super popular. Every family had at least one, if not two. So by the mid-50s, I think 1955 is the first time the government started worrying about pollution. The pollution, you have to look it up. It's 1955 is the first official document related to pollution that I'm aware of, if you can Wikipedia it or look it up. And there was several books written in the early 60s about how the birds were dying and etc. Silent Spring, I believe, is the name of the book. So anyway, there was definitely concern, and for good reason. I mean, even me, a child, I was born in '65, grew up in the '70s, in an industrial area of my city. And at that time, like, the ocean didn't freeze. We lived right next to the ocean. You know, nowadays it freezes up solid and they have to have giant non-emission diesel powered, boats out there breaking it up. But anyway, back to how it concerns your local hot rodder. So in the early 60s, they started talking about emissions. And according to the EPA, which wasn't formed until 1970, the California Air Research Board was in the mid to late 60s. So in the EPA's eyes, a 1966 vehicle from California and a 1968 vehicle for the rest of us is an emissions vehicle. It started pretty simple with like the PCV valve. That probably got us through the 60s, and air pumps. That was pretty popular, especially in California. You won't see many 49 state vehicles with air pumps before the 70s, but California had them because California had the worst pollution in the cities anyway. So in 1970, the EPA is formed by the government, and they're going to do, beyond just automobiles, you name a form of pollution, they're now in charge of it. And in the same month, they released the Clean Air Act, covering regulations for all things related, especially transportation. And it started the phasing out of leaded fuel in the early 70s, the introduction of catalytic converters by like 1975. Catalytic converters can't have the leaded gas burn through them, so leaded fuel had to go. And it's at that time, basically 1966 and 68 for the rest of us, unbeknownst to all the hot rodders in the land, it is illegal in writing to ever modify your vehicle that you drive on the road. So for years, the ones that knew this and the manufacturers of parts, said off-road only. Great, right? But the hard, fast truth that nobody wants to talk about is it's always been, well, my lifetime anyway, illegal to modify your street vehicle from its original calibration when it left the factory. Now we've all done it. And no law, no act is going to change that. It's always been that way. Now, people are sitting back watching this saying, well, my state, my town doesn't check for emissions. We don't have emissions. Well, you do. It's 50 state. It's everybody. Just because you don't have a sheriff in your town, you can't rob the bank or kill somebody. It's still illegal. Just because they're not checking doesn't mean it can't be traced back to you. Now, here we are a few years ago, which spurred the RPM Act. The EPA, in a heavy-duty vehicle emissions document on page like 600 or 700 in a giant document, wanted to make it absolutely clear their stance on ever modifying a vehicle with a VIN for racing or off-road only. They wanted to get rid of that clause. And also pursue the people that make the parts and hold them accountable. So that's, and SEMA, again, the good guys that are always fighting for us, didn't read the heavy-duty emissions document. That's not their, area of expertise. However, this went past when the EPA puts out a document, there's a certain point in time where you can respond. That all passed when SEMA, it finally came to their attention, and they put up a big enough stink that they at least got it woed up a little bit, and we've been working on this bill, the RPM Act. The act is not a bill yet. Maybe it's a bill. You have to watch, how a bill becomes law, but it's an act as far as I know. And that is going to protect your right to build a race car out of a vehicle that was once manufactured and has a VIN. And all the parts available to do so. Recently, within the last few years, with different funding for the EPA, they've started their crackdown on lawbreakers like hot rodders and the diesel guys. They're not immune either. They're getting hit just as hard. And I know, now, this whole video is just information that I've read, because I try to keep abreast on it, or I watch videos pertaining, like the people that have had the EPA come into their shop, subpoena all the records, all your documents, your Facebook posts, everything, and that's evidence. So I got friends around here that, they got their business name ends in tuner, and they're modifying vehicles. They're showing, exhaust systems front to back without cat converters and stuff. And I'm telling them they're fools, because that's evidence, and it never goes away once you put it up on the internet. In each state, I'm told the EPA has hired, your cheap lawyers or whatever to find out and pursue this. And, they get funded by the fines. Now, there's a place one town over, a diesel shop. They had a huge fine. They had it reduced some, but still a lot of money. And all over the country, you don't have to go very far or watch too much automotive-related programming to realize that it's real and they're actually getting closer. I know they subpoenaed like Jegs and Summit, and all the parts sold, or at least the ones that they are on their hit list. Wherever they went, they have your address. They know you have it. So it's, Big Brother is definitely watching more than they ever were. It's always been illegal to modify this stuff, and allegedly if it's just for a race car, you should be free and clear. However, it's very possible you'll have to defend yourself if you have these parts. That's the sad truth. Don't believe me. Do your own research. It's not good. And now to throw in all the political stuff, it depends who you are, whether you fall under these regulations. Airplanes, still burning leaded fuel. No emissions. Government vehicles, right up to the one that hauls the president around. Emissions free. Your local mail Jeep that just went roaring by your house doesn't even have a cat converter on it. Emissions free. The rest of us, every year the EPA goes to your automakers and say, if you're going to sell a vehicle here in America, it has to be this efficient, and that number keeps getting higher. And it's kind of like, in my opinion, the diesels kind of fix themselves. In the 90s, when, for instance, Roger Penske took over Detroit Diesel, he took the worst offending engine out there and made it almost double its fuel economy. It didn't smoke anymore. We were good. And he did it without with electronic fuel injection and minimal emissions. But we had to go chasing NOx gas, and now we have particulate filters and urea in the tank, and we're burning a hole in the earth faster than we can dig, chasing a gas that I don't understand, but people smarter than me say it's important. But it's a whole industry trucking the particulate filters back and forth and burning them out, or burning them out on the side of the road in the regen. A lot of the emissions devices don't work very well. So out of necessity sometimes, and sometimes just out of blatant disregard, they get deleted. In the state of Maine here, now for a inspection sticker, you have to pass the visual inspection as well. So all the trucks that have been deleted are virtually worthless, and these are not inexpensive vehicles. It's a tough one. As far as your local beaters, I think as far as cars go, gasoline burning vehicles pretty much regulates itself. The fuel economy is so much better than it used to be. Vehicles don't smoke or pollute anymore. Typically, like me, I have an unmodified, untouched vehicle. It's my beater. It gets excellent mileage. It gets me from here to there. And I have my fun cars. I'm not daily driving those most of the time. So it'll be interesting to see what the future holds. Now, as far as electric vehicles, I'm not against them. The performance can be phenomenal. The biggest problem everybody has is getting jammed down your throat. Chasing some dream that doesn't make any sense. We tried them 100 years ago, it didn't work. Our power delivery has not improved in 150 years, or however long we've had electricity. The wind blew the other day, and some people power's still out. So the demand on the grid, it can't handle it. If we all had to have them tomorrow, which they're pushing within 10 years, that's foolish, and hopefully cooler heads will prevail. Again, the corporate average fuel economy has never been higher. We keep getting more efficient and finding ways to make vehicles get better mileage and still have good performance. It just seems the hot rodders, when it comes down to the tiny, if you take all the vehicles in the world, it has to be a small percentage of a percent, if that, or even 0.5%, that are modifying vehicles, even driving them on the road or converting them to race cars. So it has to be such a small number. And I believe the numbers are published somewhere, but it's just foolish in the big scheme of things. But that is the way the political climate works. Whatever's popular at the time is probably, and the less sense it makes, the more it's likely to happen. Sad but true. So hey, I'm done rambling for today. Do your own research. Take this whole video for what it is. I've stopped myself from making this very video for about a year, but it seemed relevant. And I hope in the next congressional session or the next year, it literally takes, I had my son do it. It takes a few minutes to go on the SEMA, Specialty Equipment Marketing Association, and still fill out the paperwork and send the stuff to your senators. Because if they think it's a big deal, they'll do something about it. But they don't think it's a problem. Have a great day.